Hello everybody and welcome to a tutorial of sorts. Today I'm going to be going over how to initially deploy, how to ping for zones, and how to generally comport yourself at the beginning of a team game in multiplayer or even in a 1v1 game in multiplayer. The main reason I am doubling back on this topic is because there's currently nothing on my channel that goes over the initial deployment and the initial sort of interaction between you and fellow players, and I wanted to go ahead and solve that, as I still do see quite often questions about how to best deploy or people that don't maybe understand how to deploy, so we're going to be going over that today. So with the premise out of the way, let's go ahead and hop right in. The first thing that I want to tell you is if you've made a specific deck or a deck that serves a particular purpose and you load into the game, don't wait. Just go ahead and ping the area that you would like to take right off the bat. Experienced players, myself included, oftentimes wait to see where everybody else wants and then take whatever zone is left over. So if you don't ping, we might ping early and take the spot you want, and that's going to be no good for you. What I mean by pinging is initially when you load into the game, there's going to be obviously the map laid out in front of you, and typically the way that the community will indicate that they would like to take a specific area is by pinging it. Now these can be changed in the options menu as to which keybind you would like. For example, I have mine on the F1 through 4 key. However, without using keybinds, you can still get to them fairly easily by using these buttons down here. The custom message button lets you type in whatever you want, so I could put Kaplunk177 going here, or I could do something as simple as an attack or a defense ping, and that would indicate the exact same thing. Now, while it does vary from map to map, typically speaking, the area that you'll be fighting for in a team game encompasses 2 flags that you'll be defending and 2 flags that you'll be attacking. Obviously, there is a bit of variance to this, as in this area here on the far left, I would typically also push through this forest here, as it really helps you secure this open area, as well as puts pressure on their reinforcement corridor toward the middle. So it's going to vary from place to place. Just keep in mind that defending 2 flags and attacking 2 flags is generally accepted as alright. The next thing that I'll go over is fairly easy to understand and fairly typical for any multiplayer game. However, there are still the fair bit of people that don't know it. Hitting the Enter key will bring you into Allied Chat, while hitting the Shift Enter key will hit you into All Chat. So you'll be able to talk to all the enemies and all your friends at the same time. Typically this is used to say good luck, have fun, or say some sort of funny thing that you've been thinking about and not really too useful. However, with Team Chat, it is a chat that only you and your allies can see, and so you could and very well should use this to coordinate attacks or defenses, or perhaps ask for help should your front collapse and no one seems to have noticed on your team. I consider myself very map aware in this game, and there's still been several games in this last week where I've been playing and just completely failed to notice that an entire ally has been gutted until it's far too late to help them. So in the event that this is happening, just hit everybody with being double teamed or could use some help over here and see if they can help or not. Worst case scenario, they can't help you and you're in the exact same situation that you were in to begin with. However, moving on from the communication mechanics in the game, we'll move on to the actual deployment phase and how to properly deploy your troops such that you'll get the best use out of them possible. Now, typically speaking, you always want to deploy your troops on roads. Roads are fairly easy to spot. We all know what roads are in reality. However, there are some instances where a road might not be easy to spot. There's a map with a train station, for example, that includes a little train railroad track that bridges over a river that is not usable by transports for whatever reason, and it is closer to the front lines. And this has tricked me a few times. It's definitely tricked other players, so be sure to zoom in, check if it's a road if you're not entirely sure, and we are absolutely positive that these 2 here are roads. Now, the main reason we are using roads is because units given the move fast option will preferentially use roads, just like units given the unload at position button will preferentially use roads to travel as quickly as possible. You can see in the stats tab of the Opel Blitz, for example, that it has an off-road speed of 40 kilometers an hour. However, on roads, using this move fast or unload at position command, it will be moving twice as quickly as that. So be sure to use this as often as possible. And that moves me to my next point, which is in this game, which is very, very different from earlier iterations and earlier UGen titles, you can give orders to all of your units prior to the game beginning. So while you're deploying, you can go ahead and give orders to your Fallschirmjäger, or you could wait until you have down everything that you're going to want and then give orders to them all at the same time. I typically like to deploy my units onto the field and then give them orders as I'm laying them down, because then I know which areas are covered, which areas aren't, and what I might need. However, to each their own. A few things that I know I've covered in previous videos, but just to get them all in the same spot, is all of these Fallschirmjäger use the exact same transport. And now I could go through one at a time and give them each individual instructions, zooming in, clicking on it, telling it where to go, I want it to go here, or I could save a lot of time, go ahead and clear out all those orders, I can't for some reason, whatever, and use the tab command. Now when you have 5 of or any number of similar transports selected, you can tab through them and it will select individual members of the group you have selected. So, for example, I can do tab, unload a position, tab, unload a position, tab, unload a position, and so on over and over again until I've used all of those units. It's a much easier way to disperse the same unit all over one front. I use this a ton with things like Flammenwerfer or Ognimachiki that you'd be sending up in bunches. Another useful thing to note is if you have a bunch of things selected that aren't in the same transport, it's going to do a really funky thing, where tabbing will select groups of the same transport, and that's it. You can't really cycle through individual units, so it makes it a little more difficult. How you solve this is typically tell my commander to go here, and then you can hold shift and left click and it will remove it from the queue, allowing you to go back to tabbing through everything. So you still only have to select things one time, however, it's still going to be able to save you time on that early deployment. Something I would very much suggest is going through the options menu and actually changing the keybinds to something that you can easily use or easily think about on the fly. For example, my attack move option has been changed from whatever it defaults to over to one of the specific keys on my keyboard, or the fast attack option has also been changed in the same way. This just allows me to have better micro on the field without having to click on a unit, find hunt in this option list here, select where I'd like it to go, so on and so forth. So it just makes your life a hell of a lot easier if you get used to using these keybinds early and get them over to something that you can intelligently think of on the fly. Moving on to the actual meat of the deployment, and this is something that is going to vary from map to map, from deck to deck, from opponent to opponent. So it's not like there's any way that I can generalize it by saying you should always have X amount of infantry, Y amount of tanks, so on and so forth. I like to have options available for each and every eventuality that I see coming to happen. However, I'm not going to send a Stug into this alleyway here, as it's just not going to be able to get a very good engagement off on anything, and if I need to, I can sneak a Panzerschreck up on it and save myself 50 points. A fair bit of that actual deployment knowledge is going to come from map knowledge. Just playing these maps over and over and over again, knowing where you succeeded last time, where your opponent succeeded against you, or where you failed in certain ways. So it's going to be very hit and miss whether your deployments are perfect, at least on the onset. However, it will get better over time. That said, I can give you specific tips or tricks that will help you deploy troops in a meaningful way that will hopefully keep the opponents off of your flags and put pressure on the opponent. The first thing I like to start with is anti-tank weapons, because the majority of the things that you're going to have trouble dealing with are going to be tanks or vehicles of some sort. For example, all of the enemy infantry comes in vehicles right off the bat. All of the enemy tanks are going to be coming in vehicles, all of the enemy supplies, so on and so forth. Anything that is going to hurt you is going to be coming in a vehicle. And so the first thing you want is your anti-vehicle to be on point. The best way to find places for these is, again, map knowledge, but however, you can use the C key, holding it down, to show the cover tracker. The cover tracker will show you more or less where a unit will be able to see if they're stationed at that specific spot. I say more or less because sometimes it's a little janky and doesn't quite work out for you, and I've said on more than one occasion, okay, that thing can't see me, but it's killed my X or my Y. So use it at your own discretion, however, it is usually pretty reliable. Now, while a case can be made to initially deploy a very heavy anti-tank weapon, some decks only get access to very heavy anti-tank weapons, for example. If I get access to things like M42s or PaK-38s, I'm going to deploy those preferentially first, mostly because you don't know where the battle lines are going to be drawn right off the bat. If you win a specific area and you have your ZiS-3 or your PaK-40 deployed behind that line, then it's going to take a while to move it up to the new spot. Even worse, if you deploy your PaK-40 a little bit forward and then you lose a spot that you thought you were going to be able to take, you're just going to be out that 60 points of anti-tank weapon and potentially out a third of your anti-tank capability for that phase. So with that in mind, I'm going to deploy a few different anti-tank weapons. I'm just going to lay down 3 of them, in fact, as I think that will be enough for this front. Now, another thing that you can note while you're mousing over things is yellow on your cursor here indicates that this is light cover, while this green here indicates that it is heavy cover. That just basically affects how the unit is going to take damage or suppression damage, and typically you want anything that can be in heavy cover, the green cursor, to be in heavy cover if it's acceptable or if it works for your plan. That said, I've noticed that a spot right here has a sightline right up this road where they're going to be sending the majority of their transports, so I'm going to go ahead and unload my PaK-38 there in hopes that I'll snipe out some of their transports or get some early kills on some of their tanks. Another PaK-38 is going to come in and go to this spot here, as this will be able to see this other road and we'll be able to cut off both ingresses if we're lucky. More than likely, one or both of these are going to get killed by early tanks or early aircraft, but we might harass them a little bit on the way. Lastly, I'm going to put my last PaK-38 here just to watch up this road. I just really want to stop all of their transports. I'm going to send a Panzerschreck team over here. Whenever you're deploying into a forest or a city, it's always a great idea to have a Panzerschreck team. Perhaps not on the fronts, but a little bit behind the fronts. That way, when that Sherman or when that T-34 come harassing into you, you have an answer to that other than your just very close-ranged weapons. So with that in mind, we're also going to dump one into this city here. Again, we're going to keep it a little ways back. We don't want it to die to enemy infantry that are going to be coming up into this area, but we do want it there in case a T-34 sneaks into these areas here, and that's going to be very difficult to deal with for my infantry just sitting back here. The next thing I like to look at is support locations. What I mean by this is typically for the Axis side especially, you want to get some MG42s in your opening. These things are just monsters, and they have a 1500 meter range, so they're going to be able to support for quite a while before they need to move up. And so noting that, we're going to want to look for areas on the map where we're going to be able to station these guys where they're going to be able to do the most good. I saw one spot just over here that I'm going to be able to put this MG42 where it's going to be able to harass this town as well as put pressure onto this town where they're likely to send an MG42 or some sort of gun of their own. Past that, I really don't see a spot that would be great to have one, so I'm just going to go ahead and start with the one. We'll see what we get in here, and then we will push forward with some more. The next thing that I like to look at is where do I need to send my Flammenwerfer. Flammenwerfer, Ognamachiki, L-Flames, you name it, any of these flame troops that come in the super fast motorbike transports, you're going to want to send to heavy forests. While there's a case to be made for sending them into cities, I don't like using them in cities because they typically have more than a 100 meter gap between buildings, and moving them around in cities is very, very dangerous, as that's where you're likely to run into most of those mid-ranged capable infantry, so use them there at your own discretion. However, I do vastly advise using them inside of forests. So with that in mind, we're going to dump down, I think, 6 of them here. We're going to use the tap trick from earlier, and we're going to put 3 in this forest and 3 in this forest. Now this one's a little dicey, and so we'll have to watch these guys as they're coming up. They're going to get here a little bit faster if they send correct PTRS teams or Ognamachiki teams, so we don't want to lose these guys if I'm wrong and if we're not going to get there quickly enough. So we'll just watch them, we'll make sure we unload them into here, and we'll make an actual push for that forest instead, should that be the case. After I have all of those things down, we're going to want to start looking at our tank capability or our support tank capability. Now, you don't always have to have a tank in your deployment or in your opening. I like to have certain amounts of tanks. For example, I would probably bring a Stug in on the left-hand side of this map just to help out should there be any huge tank pushes coming up here. You can see that they are all three of them playing Sherman heavy divisions. This is 3rd Canadian, 3rd US Spearhead, and 3rd, I don't know how that happened. It's all thirds. That's hilarious. They were all in random, I assure you. It's just ironic that they're all on thirds. However, because of that, because I know that they're going to be very Sherman heavy, I don't want to get pinned down by Shermans in the opening, so I want to be able to harass them with the Stug should I need to. The Stug will beat the Sherman at 2 kilometers almost every single time, so we don't have to worry about it too much. Also, don't be too chagrined. If you're deploying all of your troops and you look up and you see, oh, I've spent half of my points and I don't have any units on the map, that's fairly typical for a team game. Now, I'd like to stress right here and right now, this is not how you would deploy in a 1v1. I don't play 1v1s, and I can tell you for a fact that if you deployed like this in a 1v1, you would be absolutely insane. You would be way over investing in one side of the map. You wouldn't have anything for the other side of the map, and typically 1v1s are fought on a much larger front per person than a team game would be fought on. So bear in mind, this is almost exclusively for deployment in team games. Past that, we're going to want to get some infantry on the field, but before then, I love my Phase A commanders. I love having them in my opening. It's just free accuracy, and it's going to make my units that much better than the enemy units if they get into combat. So I'm just going to bring that in right off the bat. Lastly, and this is going to frighten a lot of people, I'm going to bring in a Flak 88 right off the bat in that opening, dump it into that same forest there. Now, we've used all of our points, and we have literally 6 infantry on the field. This is frightening to a lot of people. You know what? I trust my boys over in 3rd Fallschirmjäger, so I trust that we'll be able to take the city without too much issue, even though we won't have that many infantry. We'll bring in 2 of those, 1 of those. You know what? We'll do 3 of those. And then we will use that same tab trick from earlier to unload him here, shift-click him out of the queue. We'll put 1 there, 1 there, and 1 there. Now, I am going to go ahead and grab the one that was going to the right side of the city and put it over here in the event that they have a lot of stuff here. I don't want to lose all 3 of these troops in the opening if I'm wrong, so I'm just going to go ahead and move it over there preemptively. Now, one more thing that you can do, if this is a serious game, if you really, really need to get that win for whatever reason, you can go through and while the timer's ticking, say one of your opponents or one of your allies has started the timer, there's no point in clicking it yourself, almost always going to have to wait for that timer to elapse. You can go through and you can drag individual units up to as close as they can get to the front. You want to make sure they have adequate spacing or else they might spawn weird, but you also want to make sure they are on the road. So moving them all up to the same area, not only is that going to save them time, get them there quicker, and make sure that they're all facing the right direction, but it also looks very pretty when you have it all set up properly, so we're just going to go ahead and do it this one time. I don't typically do this because, well, honestly, I'm a little lazy. But I would advise doing this if you really, really, really need to get that win, or if you really need to get to a spot before your enemy does. For example, if I was pushing into this forest with Fallschirmjäger or something right off the bat, I would make sure they were lined up as close to the edge as I possibly could get them. With all that out of the way, though, we are going to hit launch battle, and we'll see how my deployment does. Now, bear in mind, I'm recording the audio at the exact same time as I'm recording this actual opening, so you'll know as soon as I do how well this is going to go. I have a good feeling this is going to go fairly well, mostly because these are medium AIs, so it's not like they're going to be too much of trouble, but we'll see. Going to speed it up a little bit here just to try and get everybody to their opening spot. And now, like I said, we are going to be watching these three rather, Flammenwerfer squads to make sure that they get there right off the bat. And it looks like they should get there unmolested, so we're just going to let them be. We're going to move up our troops right off the bat to try and capitalize on that M16 going down to my Stug. Looks like all of our things are in the correct position. Huge, huge, huge thing that you should always 100% of the time do. Turn your guns onto efficient shot. You do not want them firing into something they cannot kill. They will just give themselves away, and that's no good for anybody. We're going to unload them, and we're going to throw a smoke and hide in the forest like the little German girls we are. So we were able to get both of those Scots. The city seems to have gone fairly well, and this is all with 120 points of actual infantry, 1 leader, and just a bunch of support units that are just really going to help us take this area. Typically, you would want to go ahead and start spawning in units as soon as you get the points, but right now I'm just mainly working with these original units to show that this was a proper deployment and this would have even worked against a player. Maybe not as well as it's working currently because players are just better than medium AIs. However, this is working so well that I could actually say with certainty that this would work against most of the player base. Something that is worth noting is, even though this is working really well for me right now, I'm playing a very infantry-heavy deck, so the deployment might look much different than it does currently if you're playing something like 3rd Tankovi, or even any of the decks on the opposing team. You're going to have a lot more infantry, or a lot more tanks than infantry. You're going to have a lot fewer of certain support units. You might not have a dual-purpose gun. However, the point is that you have just... What I've done is I've prepared for each and every situation that might present itself. I have AT guns lined up in every spot where they are going to matter, and they've already harried the enemy quite a bit. I have anti-tank capabilities in every spot, again, that's going to matter. And I've gone ahead and I've put early pressure on to take 2 flags that's going to force him to dump all of his reinforcements into this area. What's more, I've done all this with minimal losses just because they were properly deployed behind the lines and engaging on their terms. I would like to stress at this point that this is not me trying to show off that I can beat a medium AI. I'd like to think that I'm a little bit better at the game than the medium AI, so that is hardly the point here. I just wanted to showcase the minutiae of how to deploy properly, as well as some of the basics that player base still asks about, because, well, this game really lacks in usable tutorials for newer players. But all in all, that is going to do it for this video on initial deployments in team games, how to communicate with your allies, and hopefully how to deploy a usable front line in any instance that you possibly can. We will go ahead, you know what, let's fast forward, let's see how this goes with just these opening units. And that will be my outro, is just these opening units eventually dying to the AI.
Ein Flammenmeer. Erwarten Ihre Befehle. In Deckung! Explosionsgefahr! Vorfeld beobachten, Männer! Wir wurden getroffen! Überprüft Waffen und Munition. Ob stürmt oder schneit. Verstanden. Aufspüren und vernichten. Wir sind bereit, Herr Kommandant. Seid wachsam, Soldat. Guter Schuss. Wie lauten Ihre Befehle? Ihre Befehle, Herr Hauptmann? Volltreffer! Ziel zerstört! Jawohl, Herr Kommandant. Vorsichtig, Männer. Der Feind ist in der Nähe. Überprüft Waffen und Munition. Falls der Tank getroffen wird, sind wir hinüber. Feind direkt vor eigener Stellung. Wir brauchen etwas zum Zündeln. Der ist hinüber. Wir haben keine Geschosse mehr. Kein Anschlussring mehr. Infanterie bereit. Jawohl, Hauptmann. Verdammt, es hat mich erwischt. Sanitäter! Stehen bereit. Achtung! Feind gesichtet. Seid auf der Hut. Feind gesichtet. Gefechtsbereitschaft herstellen. Männer. Der Feind ist in der Nähe. Bereiter Hauptmann. Unten bleiben! Achtung! Zweiter Zug einsatzbereit. Feind gesichtet. Seid auf der Hut. Brauchen Sie Deckungsfeuer? Jawohl, Kommandant. Scheiße, es hat einen erwischt. Nichts wie raus hier! Die Gruppe erwartet Ihre Befehle. Wir wurden getroffen! Wir wurden getroffen! Wen den Arsch anhalten! Ah, es hat mich erwischt! Feind direkt zur eigener Stellung. Der brennt lichterloh. Überprüft Waffen und Munition. Verdammt, hier ist ganz schön was los. Feind direkt zur eigener Stellung. Wie lauten Ihre Befehle? Wachsam bleiben.